We turn now to the Blake Lively-Justin Baldoni legal battle. The actress scheduled to sit for a sworn deposition later today in her lawsuit accusing her and Ends With Us co-star of sexual harassment and retaliation.
Blake Lively has reportedly subpoenaed 107 content creators. According to Ellen Goff's statements in court today, Blake is also trying to subpoena attorney Brian Friedman's law firm. The judge questioned why this request was even being considered, but Blake's side argued that Friedman had allegedly defamed her. The judge then asked how Blake could prove her claims of an untraceable smear campaign without discovery. Ellen countered by saying that Blake already had extensive discovery. She contacted 107 creators and pointed out that several of these creators have already filed motions to quash the subpoenas. The judge seemed to agree that many of these motions were well-founded, suggesting Blake should get this information directly from Friedman or Wayfair instead. Ellen further explained that any supposed smear campaign couldn't have existed before December 21st, the day after Blake filed her CRD complaint, because their firm wasn't even retained until then. The only communication prior to that was a single text message sent on December 16th. If Blake's motion to compel were granted, Ellen said they still wouldn't have any relevant documents to provide. For example, 1. Agreements or contracts with content creators. None exist. 2. Invoices or payments for any services related to content creators. None. 3. Any bank account information showing payments to creators for this case? 0. 4. Documents proving a coordinated digital campaign against Blake? None at all. Essentially, Blake is trying to prove that people were paid to disparage her online, but Ellen insists there is absolutely no evidence of that. For the remaining requests, like communications with journalists, online creators, or sources, Ellen reminded the court that their firm wasn't even involved until late December. Any communication after that is either routine press response or protected client information. In short, Ellen's stance is that Blake's entire claim of a paid smear campaign is baseless, and the evidence simply doesn't exist. Basically, she just wants to know who's been talking to Brian Friedman that's making him say these things. Which is kind of wild because at the end of the day, he's completely allowed to defend and advocate for his clients publicly and make statements on their behalf. What she's really after is the source, and in this case, the source is Justin Baldoni, but he obviously can't give that to her. Once they got called out on this, it seemed like they tried to shift gears. The judge even asked, "Then why are we fighting over requests 1 through 4? She said that the liner firm never paid content creators, but they still had big issues with requests 5 through 8 because those were overly broad and touched on attorney-client information. The other side responded, "We're not asking for privileged information." But she pushed back, saying, "I'm sure we'll be back in front of you again, Your Honor. Why shouldn't you just order the production of all non-privileged information?" Her point was that any spike in negative publicity about her happened in 2024, and her last complaint to Wayfair about on-set misconduct was 9 months earlier. She argued that there's no real connection between her protected complaints and a supposed coordinated campaign months later. California's retaliation laws, she said, don't support that claim. And even if they did, criticism or defense against her claims isn't retaliation. The judge basically said, that's all great for a motion to dismiss or summary judgment. They also argued about media communications and whether Blake's team was trying to get attorney-client privileged info. But the reality is, Friedman had already spoken to the public. There was no secret source to reveal. They even asked if there were any retainer agreements between lawyers and third parties, and she flat out said they didn't exist. Blake's team kept insisting they weren't asking for privileged materials, but Graff made it clear. We don't have retainers. We don't have relationships with content creators. We literally don't have anything to give her. So requests 1 through 4 became irrelevant, and the judge agreed. He wasn't going to force them to produce things that don't exist. But it feels like Blake's team just can't accept when someone says, "We don't have it." To top it off, Friedman pointed out that Blake's retaliation and defamation claims specifically accuse him and his firm of running a smear campaign, supposedly orchestrated by Jed Wallace, who has already been dismissed from the case. And when Blake's attorneys were pressed on it, they switched stories. First saying Wallace was behind it, then claiming that everyone at Wayfair was somehow responsible for the online campaign.
And today is a big day in the ongoing saga. It is Lively versus Baldoni, as the actress is set to be deposed, testifying under oath. Now, she'll be grilled by attorneys for Baldoni, her Ends With Us co-star and the director of that film, who she is accusing of sexual harassment and retaliation. Baldoni has denied those allegations. Now, the deposition was originally scheduled for 2 weeks ago, but it was postponed. And we are told today a court reporter and videographer will be present, but the testimony may remain sealed under a protective order. This has been a long road for the actress since filing that suit in 2024, and Baldoni has fought back, filing a $400 million countersuit and a $250 million defamation lawsuit against the New York Times. Both of those, though, were dismissed earlier this year. Now, Lively will finally have her day in court next year because the trial date is set for March 9th. And guys, this is going to be really interesting because attorneys for both Lively and Baldoni say that they do plan to testify.
Yeah, there will be so much attention on that, Rhiannon. Okay, thank you.
Now, they are presenting an entirely different story to the judge. They're claiming that it was Jed Wallace. But the strange part is that Jed Wallace isn't even a party to this case. What really stood out to me was when they stated, "We are interested in and requesting information about the use of trolls and paid communications. We want to know the exact number of outlets that received these claims and were exposed to them." Miss Lively had previously been assured that she would not face retaliation, as stated in the retaliation clause of the 17-point agreement. But now they're talking about trolls and paid communications. Honestly, what even is a paid communication? Even the judge remarked that this case naturally draws public interest because it is, by nature, a public interest case. At this point, you can see just how weak her position has become. She now seems convinced that Brian Friedman was deliberately chosen by Wayfair. According to her latest theory, her allegation is that Wayfair hired Brian Friedman specifically because of his clientele, because he has represented people like Megyn Kelly and Perez Hilton. She's implying that, since he had these kinds of clients, he also had a network of content creators he could mobilize to talk negatively about her. But that line of thinking, well, it's a classic case of correlation doesn't equal causation. Now she's suddenly asking for details about trolls, bots, and these so-called paid communications. It feels like every time you think she's made her point, she moves the goalposts yet again. And how does it make sense that Jed Wallace was initially accused of orchestrating some kind of smear campaign, but now he isn't even part of the lawsuit? The judge even got a little snarky at one point, reportedly saying something along the lines of, "If you can't even find evidence of this on the internet, how is it retaliatory? If there was communication behind the scenes, but nothing was ever published, and even if something salacious had been published, how could it be defamatory if it never became public in the first place?" They even referenced a document in the case, a text chain in which Mr. Friedman supposedly introduced the Wayfair parties to one of his clients, who later criticized Miss Lively in the New York Times Online. That somehow led to subpoenas being issued to Perez Hilton, who is now invoking reporter's privilege. That issue will be litigated separately at another time. Her entire theory seems to rest on the idea that Friedman's client list was one of the reasons Wayfair chose him. Naturally, Friedman's firm pushed back hard, calling her claims mere innuendo. They emphasized that allegations are not facts and reminded everyone about litigation privilege. They made it clear that simply having an unfavorable opinion about her does not make it defamatory. Just because she personally labels something as defamatory does not mean that it actually is. At its core, this entire case highlights Blake Lively's apparent refusal to accept public criticism. And in today's hearing, the judge, in some ways, sided with the Wayfair parties by essentially saying, well, they don't have 1 through 4. The judge basically told her, Blake, you have to take that as a win. They don't have it. You won this point. The tone was even a bit sarcastic, almost like, you won, congratulations. Yet despite this, she's still going after 107 different content creators. The strange thing is, when the list of content creators was provided, this was in response to interrogatory number 5. Melissa Nathan gave them a list, and there were only a handful of names on it. So here's the odd part. There are 107 people who were never even identified by Wayfair, yet Blake went out and subpoenaed them anyway. At this point, it's hard not to think she absolutely needs a protective order. Because in the world of Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds, they seem to draw conclusions that don't exist, create connections that aren't there, and come up with theories and conspiracies that have no basis in reality. It all just sounds incredibly paranoid and detached from reality. It honestly makes you wonder if someone on her team, maybe even her lawyers, should finally just sit her down and say, Blake, listen, we don't have actual evidence. And subpoenaing 107 content creators isn't going to get you the result you're looking for. This is going to cause a huge storm, Blake. If you go through with this, you're only going to face even more public backlash. Backlash that you, Blake, will be creating for yourself. Look, they handed us a list here, Blake, and out of that list, 107 people aren't even included on it. This is no different from Ezra or Gotadal running to outlets like the New York Times, People, Us Weekly, or TMZ. Blake's team can reach out to the media and spin their side of the story all they want. But somehow Brian Friedman isn't allowed to respond? Everything they're doing is being twisted into some bizarre conspiracy theory. What really frustrates me is that they have the audacity to call us conspiracy theorists, when in reality, they're the ones acting paranoid, connecting dots that aren't even there, and jumping to wild conclusions. Honestly, all of this makes me think that if someone were to dig into Blake Lively's financial records, we might find payments made to content creators, to certain individuals, or even to outlets like TMZ and other media platforms just to ensure favorable press coverage. Apparently, in their world, giving gifts is now considered proof that you're paying people to say nice things about you. And we already know how Blake operates. She's known for love bombing people with gifts. She showers those around her with all kinds of lavish presents. So if that's the standard they're going by, then Blake is really just exposing herself by her own logic. And with everything that's been going on, if that's really the case, then Blake is basically just exposing herself. At the very end of all this, they basically concluded by saying, "We can't produce documents that don't exist. There is nothing for us to give." But Blake simply cannot take no for an answer. So, what does she end up doing? She decides to issue subpoenas to 107 content creators, almost as if it's an act of retaliation, because she's convinced that Friedman, Wayfair, and everyone else involved in this case is lying, except for her. To actually believe Blake's version of events, you would have to accept the idea that there's some kind of untraceable campaign happening. You'd also have to believe that these parties are intentionally refusing to comply with discovery, willingly misleading the court, and hiding documents or information. By taking that stance, she's essentially suggesting that these people are committing contempt of court, maybe even perjury. But then Blake became very upset because they hinted at the possibility that she might commit perjury if she were to testify under oath. In fact, there was even an accusation that she did commit perjury at some point in the past when she gave testimony. Whether it was with the CRD or in Texas, there were legitimate questions raised about the truthfulness of her statements. Blake clearly didn't like it when they called her out for that. But at the same time, she feels completely entitled to go on a rampage accusing everyone else of crimes. It's just another example of how absurd this whole situation has become. The reality is, they truly don't have anything to give her. Sure, the judge might rule partially in her favor and say something like, "If you have anything, you must hand it over." But the fact remains, if there's nothing there, they can't magically produce it. At some point, Blake needs to accept that fact. The bigger story here is that she decided to retaliate, not just against Wayfair, but even against the judge, because they essentially removed Jed Wallace and failed to prove that any kind of smear campaign even existed. And what does Blake do as a result? She completely lashes out, going after the entire internet like she's lost control, issuing a total of 107 subpoenas. I mean, seriously, can you even wrap your head around how absolutely insane that is? Normal people don't just go around subpoenaing 107 people. Blake Lively clearly needs someone to step in. Whether it's her or Ryan Reynolds, someone needs to sit them down and finally tell them no, and put an end to this madness. This has gotten way out of hand. So, what do you think about this whole situation? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and click that notification bell so you never miss a new video. Thanks so much for watching.